to any avail because the e-pawn is will become undefended, and then the bishop can take it. So let's see it. Pushing uh, pushing e5, e6. This is incredibly simple. If they push, this is the most basic blockade. There's absolutely nothing that white can do. If you get a bishop move, all the bishop needs to do is stay on this diagonal. It does not matter. Obviously out of range of the king, but the bishop can come here. There's nothing. Yeah, there's nothing. Yeah. So very simple defense there. If they try and push the d pawn, again, very simple draw. Just sack the bishop. Boom, boom, boom. Done. There's literally nothing that white could do. If they don't have sufficient material, this is a draw. So nothing else to see here. If you try and bring your king around, it's slightly more complicated, but we'll see that as long as the bishop stays on this diagonal, rotating between c7 and b8, it's still a W. Or excuse me, it's still a draw. You're going to be able to draw this position because as the king steps away from the pawn, the bishop captures. Nothing else to say. So we can kind of get into what I mentioned before about the bishop transitioning from b7 to b8. These are your two key squares. So you can transition between the two just to maintain zugzwang and not allow anything crazy. If your bishop leaves, let's say white plays king here and your bishop leaves the diagonal, now it's winning for white. Now you're losing. So you don't want to do this. Just transfer the bishop between the two squares, and there's nothing white can do. Because if anything they do, they're either losing the pawn, it's going to be a draw. So these are your two key squares. This is the wrong way to set up, right? It should be the opposite. The bishop should be over here, and the king should be over here. Now, why is this a problem? Well, there's nothing preventing the white king from entering the position. And we're going to see that the white king can enter, and you don't get the counterplay by taking the pawn because this bishop doesn't attack anything. It simply holds the square. So we'll see bishop transferring, like the two squares like I showed you guys before, but this time it's e7 and d8. The white bishop comes in, and now the king has infiltrated the position, and this is an easy win. There's not much else to do. The king controls the key squares in front of these pawns that are in black's side of the board, and black can't sack here because this is completely losing. White controls the key squares. So yeah, nothing else to say. The pawns will advance. Oh, a quick key point here is this is a zugzwang position where if black moves either of his pieces, he's losing. Here, technically speaking, if you were to just play here, it's actually a draw. But white can play just a waiting move, bishop b5, and black is forced to move. The king can't cover this square, it's in check. From the pawn, it's forced to go here because the bishop covers the diagonal. And it's a simple win for white after you queen. So this is the position that you need to remember. Bishop attacking the pawn, king preventing the king from entering, and also working to blockade if they do push. So how would you reach this in a more of a game scenario? So here we have maybe an ending position. You're like, oh, how do I reach this? Just remember the setup. King and bishop separated by the one square. Bishop's attacking this pawn, king here. So how do I get to this setup? Well, there's two different ways. You can go here and then here, or you can go here and then here. And these are the two squares that you're going to oscillate between when it comes time to just wait because white can't do anything. So after bishop b6, the bishop has to get out of the way because if you push this pawn, then the king could just take the bishop. And now we've reached the defensive position and there's nothing white can do. And we've already seen that there's nothing white can do. Here's a couple ideas for a side. So when the pawns are on the G and H file, for some connected pass pawns, uh, if G7, we can simply sack the bishop, so that's no problem, easy going. If bishop C4, trying to control this diagonal, we have the simple bishop takes H6, and this is nice and tricky because if you take back, it's actually a stalemate. So that's something to know. The bishop takes here. You probably should remember that, but it's also not fairly difficult to calculate in a game. Lastly, another try bishop E4. Excuse me. Yeah. Bishop E4 can be met with King G8 and King G7, and there's no way to penetrate this. It's just the king's not coming in whatsoever. Here, G7. It's just completely drawing. Check the computer. Oh, I'm sorry. If the king steps away, you just take the pawn. Oops. But yeah, so simple draw. And this is a more solid position. So you could set up like we normally do with the bishop and the king one square away. And this is drawing, but you do need to know a couple tricks. The really solid position is putting your king right outside the two passed pawns, and then having the bishop control a long diagonal. And there's nothing white can do in this position. It's a no-brainer. Uh, if G7 check, black can just sacrifice the bishop like we've seen before, and the king just can't enter. So we'll see the bishop just transferring between B2 and C3. The king can try and enter, but there's nothing that he can do. If G7, then the bishop maintains the diagonal, and we don't allow for promotion. So G7, and literally you can just take. So same thing. If H7, then we just bring our king. Simple. Nothing else, I think. We can also just take the pawn if they ever play G7, and it's over. There's nothing to do here. Just as long as your bishop maintains its diagonal, you're going to be good to go. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Again, this is the kind of stuff that's going to win you a few games, especially if you're a low-rated player. If you get into this kind of endgame, knowing when it's a win or when it's a draw, when to trade into one of these, it's important information and something that can be used and will hopefully increase your rating over the long period of time. So yeah, hopefully this helps.